Good morning on Thursday, January 19th. From the CNET studios in New York, it's time for episode 165 of the 359 podcast. And today, it's brought to you by Ben Fox Rubin and Alfred Ng, and this is all Ben's fault, so we apologize in advance.
I always blame Ben. Good morning.
When all else fails.
That's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. That's okay. Yeah, well, look, the inauguration is tomorrow. I know it's not, a pure tech story, but it's a very important thing to talk about what our next president is going to be doing related to tech and also related to Twitter, apparently. So that's the stuff that we're going to be talking about today. Send in your questions and comments about all things Trump and tech and Trump and Twitter, and we'll get to as many of them as we can at the end of the show. And I think that's about it. Let's get the ball rolling.
Choo choo.
Oh, bear with us, folks. We apologize in advance. Let's get this podcast underway, and here we go in 3, 2.
Welcome to the 359. I'm Ben Fox Rubin.
I'm Alfred Ng.
Donald Trump becomes president tomorrow. So ahead of the inauguration, our Maggie Reardon took a look at where Trump stands on a number of tech issues. Let's tick off a few of them. Net neutrality. He's expected to roll back this regulation. Alfred, do you think this is a good idea?
I have been a big advocate for net neutrality, as I think anyone that's not a millionaire should be.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that there's the idea of internet fast lanes and me having to pay extra to get, to a website, faster than any other website if they're paying extra or anything like that. It's just why it ruins everything.
It makes it much more difficult for consumers. Netflix actually talked about this related to their earnings yesterday, where they said, look, it's not really going to hurt us as much, but it's probably going to hurt some of the smaller guys. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, because Netflix makes a ton of money. Right. That's my point. Like, if you're not a multi-million dollar company, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Next point, mega mergers. Trump has talked, he's taken a populist stance about this. You may expect the AT&T deal for Time Warner not to go through. Is that also a possibility?
Yeah, he hit on that during the campaign, saying that, if he were president, that he would not allow this to go through. He has yet to explain why. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of issues with monopolies. AT&T is still saying that, no, it's not a monopoly, as much as they want to say that. I mean, I still need some more convincing, but Trump has been, very against that merger specifically. So
right. Yeah. And it's a huge one. I think it's an $85 billion merger. Mm-hmm. So we will see if it ends up happening. And last that we want to get through in just a 4-minute podcast, tax policy. He wants to cut corporate taxes, which could, in a best case scenario, increase domestic investment, including in the tech world. Do you think that's going to happen, though? That's
been a big part of his campaign, just essentially saying we're going to make American jobs great again. We're going to bring all these tech jobs into the U.S. He had this whole thing about, Apple making a factory in America instead of its factories in China, which would mean that your iPhones would cost about as much as $900 if that actually happened.
Yeah, or more.
Mm-hmm. And he, when he had his little tech summit, when he met with Tim Cook was there, and during the meeting he had talked about, anything you guys need me to do to help, I can, which is kind of a weird relationship between a president and, business for, all these like tech titans to have.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. We'll see what happens. Obviously, like the tech industry has been a little uncertain about him. It seems that relationship has thawed a little bit. Another point that we want to talk about is Trump's tweeting. His stances on tech have been pretty unclear, but he's been very clear about how he's going to keep tweeting. According to Trump, he says Twitter is a better way to talk to the public than going through traditional news media like ourselves. So,
well, we are not traditional.
I guess that's true. Yeah. So you expect to see him tweeting a lot more over the next 4 years.
Well, yeah, he's not even planning on taking over the @POTUS account, which, to be fair, is pretty recent. So it's not really an honored tradition.
Right.
But I mean, for a guy who's going to stick to his own Twitter, he's basically used Twitter as his mechanism for, responding to the press. Mm-hmm. As back then you had to throw your own press conference and then, media would show up and they'd be their filter, but now it's him going directly to the people.
Right. And the media has been responding a lot through like what he's been tweeting. I mean, like that's been directing a lot of the news.
Yeah. So if anybody's going to be controlling Twitter for the next 4 years, it's going to be the
Trump.
president. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, he is the president. So Yeah, expect to see more of that. And NBC, WSJ, they came out with a poll yesterday that said nearly 70% of those surveyed said Trump's use of Twitter was a bad idea. But I don't think that's really going to dissuade him. Anyway, if you want to read more about these stories, check us out on CNET. I'm Ben Fox Rubin.
I'm Alfred Ing.
Thanks for listening.
And we're back. Going to delve into the comments, and I'm sure there's a lot of good ones. The one thing is interesting is how, I like in our article, we kind of covered how FDR was the radio president, like quote unquote.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we're in kind of a, I don't want to call it a post-television era, but
We're getting there.
It's
We're
kind
getting
of,
there.
It's kind of a notion that's come to be somewhat accepted. I wonder what will be next. What would anyone predict? Because, I mean, nothing is forever. Twitter's not going to last forever. What will happen after Twitter? Are we going to have VR?
A VR president?
That'd be interesting.
Oh, God.
Perhaps. I mean, like, Trump has definitely done a good job. We talked about this right after the election. He's done a really good job of utilizing Twitter as his bully pulpit. And it's actually been really amazing to see, even after the election, how much he's used it and also how much it's really directed the news, either good or bad. And he's just going to keep doing that.
The difference is he's been using Twitter like a celebrity because that's what he was, you know, all this
Beforehand,
time. Everyone
yeah.
else is using Twitter as if they're, you know, because they're politicians. They're, you know, carefully tailored. They've got, you know, their safe messages, things like that. People don't go into a frenzy over it. Whereas for him, it's him sending these tweets. And the same way that you see stories, oh, Kim Kardashian just tweeted this and like that kind of stuff. That's because it's like all unfiltered and authentic. And it's one of those things where people pay attention to that. And he knew it, you know, from his celebrity poll.
Right. And it gives him the opportunity to continue to present himself as a non-politician politician.
Yeah.
I mean, like having this whole unfiltered, unvarnished thing. Going back to the poll from NBC WSJ, one of the things that people said was, look, it could have unintended consequences. If you're just going to do unvarnished tweets, could it cause a trade war or worse or whatever, which I think is a reasonable point.
Yeah, that was in reference to the unintended consequences was in reference to, you know, his effect that he's had on, you know, just businesses in general. Anytime he tweeted about Ford or Carrier or Toyota, you know, they would react or, you know, the stock would, you know, drop and then maybe rise if they responded to his tweets. But also in the sense, you know, the things that he had been tweeting about China, you know, in his first maybe like 2 weeks after winning the election. I think that was a big concern where it's like, oh, cool. We're going to have a third world war starting off of Twitter. So,
I'm interested to find out. I mean, I know that definitely a significant portion, but how many tweets actually come directly from the Donald? As
Apparently
opposed to
all of them.
Come on, there's got to be some staff.
No, you don't think so?
If you look at the metadata, if it comes from an Android, that's directly from him.
Correct.
And if it comes from an iPhone, that's like usually from his staff. Yeah.
And that's going to happen. I mean, that's how anybody in that caliber of existence has to run that kind of thing. I mean, he does. I'll give him this. He has embraced like the direct line to the public, and I think that is an arguably good thing.
Right. And it's important to mention that that's not unprecedented.
As I shoot myself in the foot working for, you know, the fake news industry.
Yeah, but still, it's. I think the thing is that that's not unprecedented. I think a lot of presidents in the past have looked for ways to get around the news media filter because for one reason or another, they don't like what's being written or said about them. So Trump is using Twitter these days. Other presidents have used other modes in the past, you know, like whether it's the fireside chats or, you know, like a weekly address, different things like that to try to talk directly to the public. So it's been interesting to see what his posture has been on Twitter, where he's definitely been, you know, picking fights with people too, which I personally thought that he would kind of tamp down after the election.
He thought that too.
That's who he is.
He told
expect that to continue.
He told CBS in a 60 Minutes interview where he's saying, you know, I'm probably going to be a little bit more restrained, and then he wasn't. So.
He changed his mind. Yeah, exactly. So I think that it's now been baked in. At some point, you expect that he's just going to pick a fight at any given day.
He also
people expect that.
He told Fox News yesterday, basically, you know, I don't like using Twitter, but he's basically making the narrative now is I don't like using Twitter, but everyone else is, you know, talking.
He feels like they forced his hand, being that he's improperly represented, so he's taking it to the streets.
So
that's
the
problem.
The new narrative.
It's okay, and you could accuse him of flip-flopping. I mean, like that's kind of taking both sides, saying I don't like using it, but I'm going to keep using it a lot. I think the thing is that he's president tomorrow. So going back to a lot of these tech policies, like where does he stand on taxes? Where does he stand on H-1B visas? Different things like that. He's going to have to be a lot clearer about what he actually is going to do about this stuff. And he's been very unclear up until now because some of these policies are actually going to have to get rolled out. So we will end up seeing what that's going to look like.
It is a level of accountability that you've never really seen before. And I mean, the tweeting president started with Obama. And now there's these long-running track records that, yeah, you can delete tweets, but people can screenshot those tweets and people can manipulate those tweets. And now there's this long-running accountability where he's essentially quoted himself on quote-unquote paper, where he can't say, "Oh, the media manipulated this, edited this."
Well,
kind
yeah,
of thing.
that's been really helpful during the entire campaign season.
Sure.
Where, so him not being a career politician like everyone else is, they can't point to, well, look at how he voted on this, or look at like this law that he supported, all the time. But his Twitter, oh man, like
is his
that
track
that
record.
is his track record.
Yeah,
that's his
exactly.
voting record.
Yeah. It actually kind of surprised me that he didn't delete certain tweets that made him look bad at certain points during the election.
I can say that I admire the fact that he's just embraced it. Like, no, this is what I said. I don't want him to I don't want anyone in that situation to try to play it up like, no.
Deleting it would make it worse.
Yeah, exactly.
The second he made himself a presidential candidate, one could argue that somebody somewhere downloaded all of his tweets.
Sure.
It's not that hard to do. And they would say like, oh, he deleted these or those. So I think he was just smart enough to realize that he couldn't hide some of the worst,
or just
some of the
didn't
ones
care.
that made him look more hypocritical or didn't care.
Yeah, I agree with that. It'll be interesting to see where it goes. But back to VR presidency.
Right.
How would that work?
Well,
one, they have to be all so cheap that everyone has a VR set, for one.
That'll happen eventually.
We've seen enough of this, right? That like the tech community basically just wants us to sit on our couches all day.
It also have to be as easy as pulling something out of your pocket and just looking at it. It's not like with a VR set, oh, I want to see. Oh, okay, cool. Like it's not. It's not that easy.
Let's keep doing the podcast.
Do the entire podcast like this. All right. I just feel like Geordi from Star Trek.
Right. I don't know what that would look like, but I think we may be headed in that direction, or like a VR or an AR president. I mean, like the other thing that's kind of funny and interesting about it is that most of what we talked about related to Twitter, like throughout the podcast, has been that Twitter is dying. Twitter is the cesspool. The future president, as of tomorrow, is his mechanism of getting in touch with people.
That's not entirely
make Twitter great again.
That's not entirely true though, because everything that he posts on Twitter, he also posts on his Facebook page. It's just there's not enough journalists, that are like constantly mining his Facebook page.
Well, it's easier to mine a linear timeline in Twitter.
And then you can share, like there's all the media attention is on Twitter. That's why,
So if Twitter goes bankrupt for whatever reason, not that I'm saying they are, we could just go to the Facebook page.
Yeah,
it's
most
got
of
the
his
same
stuff is
information.
Okay.
Yeah, calling
I
out
didn't
to
know
the
that.
chat. One, where will Trump go for his social interactions if and when Twitter should go away?
Snapchat.
Oh God, no! Please don't.
Second, what is the next logical avenue for this post Twitter, whenever that may happen?
That's a great question.
Beyond the Trump presidency.
It's a great question. I really do wonder that, especially after coming out of CES, where tech is going these days. I really that's definitely something that's going to cook my noodle over the next couple of days, because that's what it's been like recently. Every 8 or so years, the internet president. I think Obama was described as like the internet president. This is a social media president. What's the next step? So
It'll most likely be Instagram if Twitter went on
the gram president. Got to gram it.
I mean, yeah. I mean, if anything, he would just type up like what he wanted to say on like notes.
So what you're saying is put in your resumes for White House photographer now.
Right.
Yeah, sure. I'm sure he loves the photos.
Nathan in the chat says, as someone who's pretty heavily invested in tech, I'm praying he doesn't ruin everything. Nathan, we're interested to hear your perspective on that, and what are some of the fears you may have that could come from his positions on the tech industry.
Right. Give us some more details on what everything means, because there are a lot of areas that he could potentially change going in.
He
So,
says being pro-tech doesn't mean he won't put forth legislation that is harmful to tech trade. And these are some of the things we saw post-summit. What were some of the takeaways from that summit outside of some of the glorious memes?
I think there was at least an impression that I got that the tech world was willing to work with him in a certain way. I mean, in a certain sense, they have to.
Yeah.
So but that relationship, which was very adversarial, I would say during the election, at least they were coming to the table. At least they were talking. And like Jeff Bezos was at that meeting. Jeff Bezos was very negative about Trump during the election. So I think a lot of them wanted to, let that lie.
One of the key issues that they brought up was his stance on immigration and the
H-1B visas.
Yeah, visas. Yeah. Essentially, Trump had been talking about his immigration policies where he wants to make, keep it American workers, provide more American jobs. And the tech industry, directly contradicts with that, where a lot of people in the field are, engineers.
They come in from overseas.
Yeah.
A lot of that has to do with the fact that, they complain that there aren't enough qualified individuals in the U.S. To fill those jobs.
So these CEOs did bring it up at the summit, saying like, look, you're not you need to be able to embrace like the diversity and
Right. We have these job openings.
Otherwise,
we need to fill them right now.
Yeah.
So
otherwise, our products aren't going to be as good as you keep thinking that they're going to be.
Right.
Basically.
Yeah, it could be a matter of training more U.S. workers to be able to fill those jobs, but that's not something that happens overnight. So it's an interesting discussion to have, but at the same time, you're not going to get rid of the H-1B program anytime soon, or significantly reduce it. I might be wrong about that. I mean, like he might drastically change that program, but the way the pipeline is at this point, they need to fill those jobs.
He's also been offering like tax incentives for companies that build in the U.S. and provide more jobs in the U.S. And it's a move that Amazon created 10,000 new jobs.
They're planning on adding 100,000 new jobs. Yeah. Most of those are in fulfillment centers. Some of that was PR.
Yeah.
That they already had plans.
SoftBank, IBM, all these kind of reacting to Trump's tax incentives promise. But he's also been threatening countries, saying, look, not countries, companies, saying if you build factories in another country, we might hit you on taxes, which is really not a great message to send, where you can only build here and you can't build anywhere else. Like,
do you think it's just blowing smoke, though?
He could be.
Yeah,
we're gonna find out tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
I wanted to hit on one point that was in Maggie's story also, like talking about cutting taxes. By the way, this is not a given that U.S. companies are going to use this money for incentives. I'm quoting directly from Maggie's story now. In 2004, the U.S. allowed American companies to bring in the profits they had earned overseas in the hopes they would hire more workers. Most of the money went to executives and shareholders instead. So there's no, silver bullet to solving some of this stuff.
Okay, here's a perspective from the chat. Ignis BM says Trump is for free markets. That alone gives the tech industry a good environment.
It's a good point.
It is a good point.
That's definitely a good point. I would say that it definitely gives some of the tech players, an opportunity to work with him related to that, regardless of the fact of what they might disagree with him on social issues or what have you. So
what model of phone does Trump use again? Do we remember?
Is it
I'm not
iPhone?
sure what. I'm not.
He says
no, he uses
Android.
an Android, but I'm not sure. But he also has an iPhone.
Okay.
I get him this.
I think he has a lot of money, so he might be able to have more than one phone.
A billionaire.
All the phones, the best phones. I'll give him this. It's better than a BlackBerry.
Right.
Yeah.
And on that note, let's call it a day.
Cool. All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks for the questions. Okay. The 359 podcast is available on iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, SoundCloud, FeedBurner, Google Play Music, and
of course,
CNET.com.
CNET.
Thanks for watching.
We'll be back next Monday.
On Monday.
See you guys then.
Cool.
See you.
Have a great weekend, everybody.